Nobody had ever scientifically investigated this until an incredible guy I got to know called Professor Tim Kasser, who's at Knox College in Illinois. And Professor Kasser made some really important breakthroughs in this. So there's two ways. Everyone listening to your show has two kinds of motivation in their life, right? We're all a mixture of both. So imagine if you play the piano in the morning because you love playing the piano, it gives you joy, right? That would be what's called an intrinsic reason to play the piano, right? You're not doing it to get anything out of it. That's the thing you love, right? It sounds like jiu-jitsu was like that for you. Writing is like that for me. Everyone will have something in their life that just gives them joy as they do it, right? Okay, now imagine you played the piano, not because you love it, but because your parents are massively pressuring you, it's their dream for you. Or in a dive bar that you can't stand to pay the rent, or to impress a woman, right? That would be what's called an extrinsic reason to play the piano, right? You're not doing it because that thing gives you joy. You're doing it to get something further down the line, right? Now, obviously, we're all a mixture of both. But Professor Kasser showed a couple of really interesting things. Firstly, the more you are driven by extrinsic values, the more your intrinsic values are starved, the more likely you are to become depressed and anxious by quite a significant amount. He also showed, as a culture, as a society, we have become much more driven by these junk values, right? We've become much more driven by, think about how Instagram makes you feel,
sure,
right? We've become much more driven by this hollow external sense of, think about something as simple as, a little while ago, I was at Elton John's last night in Caesar's Palace, right? Amazing thing to be at. And about half the fucking room is filming it isn't even looking at Elton John. They're just watching it through their phone. Now that's a small example, but you can see what they're doing. In order to display their life, to invite envy from other people, they are not living their life. No one wants to watch your shitty video of Elton John. There's thousands of videos about Elton John that are much better than yours, right? Why are you doing that? You're never going to watch it either. You're doing it to say to other people, envy me. Right? It doesn't make you feel good in that room. Actually makes you feel worse. You're not enjoying the experience.
Right.
And it makes them feel like shit because you're trying to invite envy in your friends. That's a small example of a much wider thing, of a kind of junk values that have taken our minds. So the reason that relates to what you're asking about Brazil is Professor Kasser has shown there's two sets of solutions to these junk values taking over our minds. One is, it's like fucking air pollution. Get the messaging out of your head. More 18-month-old children know what the McDonald's M means than know their own surname, their own last name, right? From the moment, Professor Kasser put it to me, from the moment we're born, we're immersed in a machine that is designed to get us to neglect what is important about life, right? None of your listeners will lie on their deathbeds and think about all the shit they bought and all the likes they got on Instagram. They'll think about moments of meaning and connection. That's like a banal, obvious thing. But we're constantly pushed to not think in those terms, to think about show it off, buy, spend, right? These junk values have taken over our minds. So part of the solution is just fucking get rid of most of this advertising, get rid of most of this, very tightly regulate it.
But in doing so, you limit commerce. You're limiting people's ability to sell things. You're changing the current market that a lot of people don't have any problem with.
I know this is a heresy in the United States, but limiting commercial speech is fine by me, yeah.
I think it's fascinating. I think it's a fascinating discussion, but it is, in a sense, it's limiting free speech as well. I mean, and we have a real problem with that. The problem with it is that as soon as you start to put any regulations at all, and you say, oh, you shouldn't be allowed to advertise, even if it's advertising honestly about a great product, that people will have real issues with that.
So we already have advertising regulation. You can't put up an advert saying I've found the cure for cancer.
Right, that's what I'm saying, honestly.
So this is, I would argue this is a tightening. So for example, in London, there was a big controversy a couple of years back.
Skinny billboards.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was a billboard of a impossibly hot woman and an impossibly hot man. And the billboard said something like, are you beach body ready?
Right.
The clear implication being if you don't look like these people who you'll never fucking look like, you're not ready to go to the beach. And the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, just said this: you can't do this, right?
Well, why?
You can still advertise your bodybuilding.
Silly. But that's so silly. I mean, this is it's not an unobtainable ideal. You're looking at two examples of it. Well, okay? They're real human beings.
Yeah, but that's like, I mean, in a way, I understand what you're saying.
I mean, I'm not saying that you have to be that way, but if you do want to look like that man and have that body, it is a possible goal.
Yeah, I mean, it's not possible for the vast majority of people, right? Like,
if they don't have the time or the effort, it's not. But very many people have radically changed their body. I'm not saying that you have to do it. I'm not saying you should do it.
I understand
but it is a possible thing to do. And if you're trying to sell fitness, wouldn't you sell an example of someone who's really good at it? Like if you're trying to sell a business course, wouldn't you show a guy with a giant house and a Ferrari? Like, this is a guy who's done really well at business. Look at his penthouse apartment overlooking Manhattan. You wouldn't say, well, that's an impossible goal. I'm going to show you a person in a middle-class suburb because this is as good as you're ever going to get.
I think that's a fair point. I think there's two things going on, isn't there? There's the freedom of people to market what they want to do, and there's...
it's a nanny state issue that people have a problem with. By saying that these are impossible to achieve body goals.
We already have regulation of these things. So, and people don't call that a nanny state thing. I think, we
have regulation of these things, but that is not, I mean, I don't think this is a good example.
Well, what's a better example? So Professor Kasser said there's two sets of solutions to these junk values problems. There's get the contaminants out of the atmosphere sort of thing, which he says is actually a weaker one than the second set of solutions. So how do we stop people being pumped full of bullshit junk values, right?
Educate them on what it's happening to them and make it less appealing.
Well, this is the second part. And you've gone to what I think was the most important part of the research Professor Kasser did. So he was working with a guy called Nathan Dungan. Nathan is a financial advisor in Minneapolis. And his job was to work with adults who were having trouble budgeting and explain budgeting to them and help them do it, right? And he gets a call from a school. It was a kind of middle-class school. It wasn't super rich, wasn't poor. It was a middle class, where they were having a problem. That the kids at this school were becoming obsessed with getting like the latest Nike sneakers or the latest iPhone or whatever it was. And if their parents couldn't afford it, the kids were really freaking out, right? So they say to Nathan, would you come in and just explain budgeting to these kids, right? So Nathan goes in, he tries to explain budgeting and quickly realizes these kids don't give a shit about budgeting, right? There's something else going on here. They are so obsessed with getting these things. So with Professor Kasser, he designs this program that led to a really interesting breakthrough. It's something people can try at home, right? You don't have to do it in this context. So they got, and you can do it just as adults, but they did it with parents and their teenagers, right? They come in, it was once every couple of weeks for, I think, 4 months. And at first they just say, the first meeting they had, they just said, write a list of everything you have got to have. They didn't define that, right? And people, of course, say like a home, a car, whatever. But quite quickly, people would say Nike sneakers. The parents would name expensive things. And they go, okay, tell me how you would feel if you got these Nike sneakers, right? And very rarely, I don't think any of them were like basketball players where it was like, I need the jump or whatever, if that's the right phrase. It was very often, I would be, almost immediately, I'd be accepted by the group. People would envy me, right?
Yeah.
These insights are just beneath the surface, right? They go, who put that idea in your head? Where did you get that idea? And of course, everyone thinks they're smarter than the ad, but giving people the ability just to see how hollow those junk values were, that was the first part. Second part was much more interesting and took longer. Then they would have in future sessions, they'd say, well, okay, given that's not actually made you feel better, what are moments in your life when you have felt satisfied, happy, in a flow state? What are things that are meaningful to you? People, a whole range of things, playing sports, playing music, reading, whatever it was, right? And they say, okay, how could we build more of that into your life and less of these junk values? How could you do more of this every week? And just meeting, we don't have these conversations in our culture very often, just meeting once every couple of weeks and checking in with each other and going, actually, I managed to play guitar for an hour every day. I managed on Saturday to take my kid to the beach and we went, or whatever.
That's going to stifle materialism?
What it led to, so this was monitored by Professor Kasser, it led to a significant shifts in people's values. That they had a significant decrease in junk values and a significant increase in more meaningful intrinsic values. And we know that correlates with lower depression and anxiety over time. The weird thing is, I sometimes feel like with both my books, Chasing Screaming Lost Connections, I sometimes feel like I'm giving people permission to know the thing they already know.